There was a lot of money, there was a lot of construction. This was not a little movie.
And for a period of time, I didn't have a weekend off for 11 weeks.
This is for killing it, that's the way we'll do it, I'm for that. Nothing else.
It got tense inside those corridors.
He loves working with smoke, tons of smoke, this beeswax.
Sometimes I know they used to complain about me not sitting there having a heart-to-heart. I didn't want to sit there and have a heart-to-heart. I wanted them to feel insecure. I wanted them to be afraid. And that's why I'd never show them the alien.
The whole thing pivoted on believing a number of rather fantastic things. And it was very clear that if the monster looked silly or the chest-bursting scene looked ridiculous or, the whole thing was a lost cause.
My personal predominant writing emotion throughout that whole production was deep worry. For once in my career, create a really good movie. The elements were there. And at the same time, there were elements there that could bring it all down and turn it into, kitty litter.
We shot at Shepperton Studios. Then it was a kind of slightly run down just outside of London and been a famous studio. The Who were in a soundstage trying out a laser show next door to us. There was a special effects unit at Bray Studios, which was way at the other end of London. I actually left right when they started shooting. I thought, Gordon was going to stay there. Came back when there were problems and spent most of the next year there, until we were finished.
I went on the set several times, yes. Quite remarkable, actually. I didn't expect it to be quite as fascinating as I found it to be. I remember the first day I went on the set, they took me through the whole workshop and showed me what they were doing, and I was pleasantly surprised.
I seem to remember the length of the production was, I think it must have been about 14 weeks. I know we went over a couple. It was a tough schedule, very, very tough. It was tough because he really was, as always, pushes the fabric.
It was tense because the budget was very low, and there were, within the first 4 days of shooting, there were 9 producers and studio executives on the set just counting the minutes on Ridley and complaining and why wasn't he shooting, and he was shooting so fast. They gave him no pre-light time, so he was trying to find the look in the first 2 days. And one of the producers, I remember, came to me on the 4th day and said, "Why is he taking so long?" And I said to him, "I don't understand what you're saying. He's doing 40 setups, 50 a day sometimes. The stuff looks amazing. I don't know what you're all doing." And it did get to Ridley. I remember one instant, I was right next to him. He went off like a rocket. It was like power coming out, and he punched his fist right through the ceiling of the bridge in just sheer frustration because he did not understand why everyone was on his back.
Well, of course, our first day of shooting, and all of the things start popping, and there was smoke, so much smoke, it was unbelievable. The canisters were going, and the smoke was being pumped in because we're supposed to be on fire as we're crash landing into this strange planet. I'm surprised none of us are dead. I mean, they didn't have codes like here. They have to have a water base, which took a long time for them to get, but over there was like smelt pots. You were so grimy when you left at the end of the day. I mean, between the being sprayed with glycerin and the smoke and the beeswax. John Mala was the one who designed the costumes, and these costumes were, they were huge. They were padded. We had big plates. They were like football padding, only they were sort of very, very heavy plastic, and then we had these big bubbles on the top of our heads, and they had CO2 canisters in the back to set off that smoke as we went along.
Standing in that spaceship with a clip on, fastening it on, within 15 seconds, I'm getting really hot. And I don't get claustrophobic, but I'm getting really hot, and you could easily get phobic, right? I said, Jesus, this doesn't work. You got to keep them cool inside here. We have to have some kind of help with, oxygen, correct mix, right? After all, we are in the 20th century. Isn't that possible? You got aqualungs and you got breathing apparatus. And explained to me why it was difficult.
We had hockey gloves that we had to wear, and moon boots, and this desert. It was the largest set in Europe. It was huge. It was a desert. They shipped in all of the sand. It was absolutely unbelievable. And here we are. We're supposed to trudge across it. Well, it was a heat wave. It was 115 degrees. Our suits had been lined with nylon, which makes you sweat anyway. We just wore sort of like little leotards underneath the whole thing, and then we'd get into this suit, and then off we'd go. Well, they had forgotten to put in any sort of escape for our breath. Well, if you're in there for any length of period of time, you start breathing carbon dioxide.
I do remember I almost passed out because a lot of that stuff was untried. They put it on you, and you just tried to see if it would work for you, and I really could not breathe.
We were passing out like flies. I mean, it was unbelievable. Poor John, by the time he'd get to the other end, they had to have a nurse there with an oxygen tank because he would sweat so profusely in there, he couldn't even see. It would just be one big, massive bowl of sweat.
I can remember John being very, very unhappy about, I think he found it pretty claustrophobic, shut up in the helmet.
So they'd have the nurse give him some oxygen and stuff like that, and all right, off we go again. They couldn't see a problem until it came to the distant shot where, to make the set even look bigger, they had kids. And two of the kids were Ridley's kids. And they both passed out in those little suits. So then, obviously, there must have been something that was going on, so they gave us air. That was nice of them.
I mean, Ridley pushes everybody. He tends to concentrate on all aspects of the frame. In other words, he's painting his picture. And so sometimes actors who are not used to this are used to the director sort of focusing on them and them only, whereas Ridley is concerned about, the look, about the dust, about the lighting, about the way things are dressed and things like that. I think they found sometimes that they were probably being a little bit neglected. And I remember Tom had some kind of angry words about having to hang around a long time on set.
The studio, of course, resisted a lot of what he was doing, resisted the time he was taking. I resisted some of the time he was taking. We had a full cast waiting for 3 days in one case.
Now, Tom, in your time.
I mean,
okay?
wait till I move. Okay.
Yes, I will. Okay, ready? And action. Ready, Tom? And turn back to me, love. Ready?
And we all were getting pretty disgruntled. But it was all worth it. We all knew we were making a classic.
The first week, I had to I think, grab Jonesy, and I was wearing glycerin because it was supposed to be hot and we were supposed to be sweaty. And we did this shot, and my face started to get very red, and I felt this incredible burning. And I looked at the cat, and luckily they called lunch. I went upstairs. I was crying because I realized I was allergic to Jones. And I thought, gosh, it was probably so hard for Ridley to find 4 matching cats. They're going to get rid of me because I'm allergic to the cat. I was sure that it had been harder to find the cats than me, and maybe it was as hard, I don't know. But luckily, after I washed my face, it was the glycerin in cat hair that I was allergic to. But I remember thinking, I'm so out of here,
Everything was so claustrophobic on that set. I mean, that is one of those sets where you walked in, and there's the engine room. Well, that's fine. But connected to that is the corridor. Connected to that was the cafeteria. Connected to that was the hospital. It was all connected, the ship. So once you were on, you were on. You had to go through everything in order to get off.
So you could actually walk around the set and come out in different places and never leave it. And that's, in a way, how Ridley liked it and shot it.
And you couldn't see out, so you didn't know where you were. And it was almost like shooting on location, and that really did contribute to the claustrophobia and the realism. I know it really affected the actors because they, no matter where they looked, they saw Nostromo, long halls and everything. They never, with practical lighting, all inside.
Because I was mostly off-Broadway actor, to be in this set, there were these beautiful, majestic sets where you could roam freely and see the whole world of the film.
I think when you're dealing with confined space, that's one of the very much used aspects of the thriller as well. It's the very center of the pieces like Huis Clos and so on, It's, there is no escape. That is one of the bases of the real tension of the film.
It was a low-key subject. There were very, very tight areas. Quite difficult to light in places, so unless you were going to swamp something with front light, then it was a bit complex, especially as so much of the movie was shot handheld with Ridley, though he did some form of blocking. It didn't mean to say it was particularly where he was going to end up. He also storyboards everything. He does small sketches, it's brilliant. You get the light, the shade, the whole caboodle there. So it was his choice of lenses. It was his choice of where he was going with that particular camera. I suppose my effort was more in towards, I covered most of it with a second camera, tended to do the tighter shots when his camera wasn't in my shot.
Ridley was really subjective. He was operating the camera, so I don't think he could really pull back. We sensed right at the top that he wasn't able to pull back and be objective and come to us and talk to us about specifics. So being with an extraordinary group of actors allowed him to do what he was doing in terms of just composing this magnificent-looking film, looking through the camera.
He did something no director's ever done before or since. He had about 5 or 6 pages of each character. And this is the actor's work usually, but he had the whole background, how many missions I'd flown, my mother and father, my family, had my whole history written out on paper.
One of the things about Dallas's character, and for the other characters too, there was no history. It was hard to really, it was about the alien, let's face it. It wasn't about these character building, any one of these individuals. That was something we had to realize as we went along.
I think we ought to discuss the bonus situation.
Right.
Brett and I, we think we deserve full shares, right, baby?
Well, we were doing the breakfast scene, and it was very low energy, I remember, and I could tell that Ridley wasn't pleased, but he was again behind the camera, and as we walked away from the master with the group of all of us, Ridley suddenly turned to me and he grabbed my hand and he said, "Look, I want to give you your motivation to pick up your fucking teacup." And I went, and I burst into tears and I ran off. And he caught up with me and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry." He said, "It's what I wanted to say to John, but I couldn't say it to him, so I said it to you." It was his second film and my first film, and he always said, it was trial by fire for us.
Over the years, I've learned to communicate differently with actors on different subjects. Sometimes it's best to say nothing and let them evolve, right? And then instruct.
It was interesting. We'd find ourselves going off and having lunch together and going down to the pub and talking, and it actually became like these, 7 people on the ship. It was kind of interesting, and you sort of developed your own little character from that.
Well, I was from the theater, and I didn't realize that some actors really love to improvise, and Yaphet was certainly one of those. And Ridley, at that point, he was operating, and I'm not sure how comfortable he felt with our little group. And I remember that one of the scenes where there was a lot of improvisation was a scene which he used to film the rehearsals. So we never had rehearsals, and everyone just sort of went for it, which was actually a great learning experience. But it helps the film, because I think we were on edge, and we were sort of you know, into a survival mode. So I think it works very well. But at the time, it was hard for me because I came from such a different discipline where you are very faithful to the words of the writer.
Well, Yaphet's a big guy and quite formidable, and I think he tried to corner Ridley. There was a sort of a running joke where Ridley used to come up to us and say, which door is Yaphet standing by this morning, you know, so that he could go onto the set via another door where Yaphet wasn't there waiting to corner him.
Yaphet was always evolving, and in God bless him, driving me crazy, coming to me with millions of ideas on a daily basis, saying, even to the extent of the day he would die, saying, you know, I'm not going to die today, I'm going to kill this son of a bitch, you know. And
I think there was genuine tension between, funnily enough, the tension that in the film between the below decks guys, between Yaphet and Harry Dean Stanton, was sort of reflected to a degree actually in reality, because I think Sigourney found it quite lonely, being the sort of, you know, the heroine amongst all these kind of tough guys, and it's certain parts of that atmosphere I think carried on a bit.
Would you get off my back, please?
I'll get off your back as soon as Club Module's fixed.
Sigourney had certain nervousnesses because Ridley wasn't inviting her at all to Russia's, and it was an early movie for her, so she wasn't quite sure how she was coming over.
Sigourney was the new kid on the block, and they all felt that she wasn't really doing that good a job in the scenes with her. And they were grumbling among each other and felt that it might hurt the success of the film. And she and Yaphet especially would argue a lot in between scenes, but that manifested itself in the movie that was very convincing.
I don't want anybody to say nothing.
I'm thinking.
Well, think fast.
Unless somebody can come up with a better idea, we're going to proceed with Dallas's plan.
She started out being very emotional and all of this stuff because of Dallas dying, and he just kept pushing her and pushing her. And in comes Yaphet, and he goes, all right, what are we supposed to do now? And then there's the scene, and then she says, I'm the captain of this ship. And he looked at her and he goes, you've got to be kidding.
Listen, I'm not drawing any goddamn straws. I'm killing that thing right goddamn now, and I'm not waiting.
That's what I'm talking about, Parker, if you will listen.
Let's hear it. I'm listening. I want to hear the plan.
Well, the third time he comes on, he goes, you're the captain of this ship? I'm 250 pounds, black as can be. I have a fucking following, bitch. So if you're the captain of this ship, you better fucking tell me I am. Well, off he goes again. This time he comes on, and I'm sure that Ridley was egging her up because she had to be really, really strong. And so now this time he comes into the thing, and she goes, I'm the captain of this ship. And he says, okay.
Listen to me. If we break quarantine, we could all die.
Would you open the goddamn hatch? We have to get him inside. There was the scene in the hallway when she won't let us onto the ship after this whole trudging along with the bloodsucker on John's face, and we come in, and then she starts getting upset and saying, you know, we shouldn't be there, and then I slug her. Well, every time I went to hit her, she would duck the hit.
Right, what the fuck is going on?
Hey!
And so Ridley came over and he said to me, get her this time. So I thought, well, what am I supposed to do? I went like this, she ducked, and I came back and hit her that way. She went right into it. I didn't mean to hurt her. She literally went right into it.
What the fuck is going on?
Hey!
And she burst out crying, and that's what pissed her off, because she said that Ripley wouldn't cry. So she wasn't too happy about that, and she didn't feel that it was necessary to do that. But I guess Ridley felt that it was necessary to do that.
Ash was the real masterstroke, I think, in that he was completely... That was a one-off, wasn't it? That's the first time, you know, you have corporate paranoia, right? That in there you've got a suit on the ship. The difference is the suit is a robot, is a humanoid. So when Ash suddenly became peculiar, he goes peculiar on Sigourney. And he says I can explain everything when he's over her shoulder, and mother's womb. And she suddenly is spooked by him and realizes he's not what he seems to be. Then he goes strange, and he has the sweat of milk here. And then he has to goes at it. And I always thought that was interesting, that do humanoids have sexual urges? You know, what would be nice is that this is the closest he ever gets to a sexual relationship. Then they come in and knock his head off, then you go from Ash to a very small person underneath, running around with, if you watch it carefully, rather dodgy arms, okay? That's a dodgy moment. But it's taken up by the shock, the slack is taken up by the shock of, Jesus, a robot, then getting bashed and bashed by Yaphet. And then you've got Ian with his head stuck through the table, lying in a sea of milk and caviar and pasta and glass marbles. I thought the glass marbles were great. They're like memory, clear glass marbles. And poor Ian had to, every time I'd do a take, I'd give him, he hated milk as well, I'd give him a little bit of milk. So he'd say, ready? And then he'd start to talk. And then we then grizzled it up afterwards, gave it a little bit of effervescence on sound.
All other priorities rescinded.
And then incineration. Then it becomes really scary, because he says, that's a great speech. That speech came later, which I think Hill and Guyler had to write. We had to write that Ash is saying it's not, it's indestructible.
You have my sympathies.
Yeah, the head's like that, and then you cut in like. But I thought the head was very beautifully articulated, but I think something went wrong in the drying process. And I think, they've changed the level and quality of latexes today, but in those days it shrunk. And he said it shrunk. I said, because you took a head cast, how could it not look like Ian? He said it shrank. I said, oh, God, you want to come back and redo it? No, we couldn't. So we had to get on with it. There was no coming back on that kind of budget. You got to keep going.
At the end of the first week of shooting, I asked to look at some dailies, and Gordon Carroll said, "You're not allowed to come to dailies." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Those are privileged." I said, "Gordon," I said, "surely if anyone has a right to look at dailies, it's me." On this picture, Gordon said, "Sue me." Right, Gordon did a much simpler thing than suing him. I went up in the projection booth with the projectionist. I stood and I looked. And I looked, and I saw it, and I was impressed. I was pleased. I said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "That looks good." And for the first time, I began to see the value of getting a director whose focus was so strongly on the photographic look of the film.
I think pretty soon we all knew, you only got to see the dailies, etc., to know that something, quite special is happening.
Morning, Captain.
Take one.
No. Cue the bed.
The production designer was Mike Seymour, who'd worked with Ridley on commercials and things. Well, I seem to remember he had two art directors under him who've gone on to pretty good things. There was a guy called Les Dilley, who's now a production designer in his own right, and there was Roger Christian.
Yeah, well, a production designer is kind of in charge. He's head of the band, really, and works closely with the director and eventually with the cameraman. We managed to pull together this really good team, but it was hard work. And I remember a time when we were doing 7 day weeks in the art department. Because we started shooting, and we were building all the time. I think I seem to remember we had something like 120 construction crew working for the best part of 6 months.
The production designer, the concept designers who were in there were generally tense because of me. I don't think anybody else was leaning on them about anything, not even Ridley. But I was. I looked at everything that came out of that art department to see how closely it adhered to the designs that I had bled over. And when it didn't, I was very, very pushy.
I guess the only unconventional thing was that Dan was always there, going from drawing to drawing, and he was really shepherding this thing. And I don't know that they were used to that, because Dan meddled a lot, but he really cared about the movie, and it was Ridley that gave him the license to do it, because Ridley liked Dan's advice and his input, and so the writer. Ron Shusett was there as well. So the writers had quite a presence on the picture, even though Walter Hill and David Giler wrote another version of the movie.
Les was taking care of the planet and the alien exterior craft and interior and the jockey, etc. Roger was in charge of everything to do with the Nostromo. And that's when I suddenly realized that 8.2 was nothing.
The whole idea of the main sort of set, and Ridley discusses with me, was that he wanted the opening to be rather like being aboard the Marie Celeste, the famous ship which was found drifting somewhere with evidence that people had been on it, but there's no evidence of the people.
Ridley saw the ship very much as a metaphor for a Gothic castle or a World War II submarine, or something that still goes on in sci-fi movies, a kind of retro, accessible technology with great big transistors and very low-res video screens and everything. There's always a kind of a comfort zone there, because we all knew that even though they weren't readily available, they would obviously have things like flat screens and there'd be high resolution, but no, we did it, with great big switches.
And I wanted to have wafer-thin screens that are plexiglass, that just float on clips. And of course today you've got computer screen is exactly like that. It's like plexiglass. Because I figured that's where it would go. But I really got those things off Jean-Giraud Mobius, when he would be drawing and speculating. A lot of his stuff you see 30 years ago is now.
The ship is a strange mixture of retrofitted old technology, a kind of an industrial nightmare, like being trapped in a factory or something. And so the way I wanted to go along with that was I talked them into all these industrial symbols around and color coding of everything. I thought that would be kind of cynical and create that industrial revolution feel, of people getting lost in machines, which I knew was part of the metaphor. Some of them were semi-humorous, so I was hoping people would notice where that black meant a vacuum, and that and artificial gravity meant a red line underneath, and if there was no artificial gravity and it was black beyond this door, it meant don't open it, and so there was a figure of a little space person floating upside down, and stuff like that, sort of in stress. So I don't know, it went in all these directions, but somehow it all fit together. Ridley made it all fit together, and Ridley he's a wonderful artist, and he wanted it to look a lot like a Mobius designed ship with all kinds of rounded surfaces and with an Egyptian motif.
Ron Cobb was very good with the sort of mechanical device things, and had already had some concepts, because before it got to us, I think Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett had sort of worked out some ideas.
I originally strongly suggested an idea of a ship that was very bizarre. It was all kind of a big hammerhead that tumbled to create gravity, and as it moved along, and it was just too weird for anyone who could quite understand it. And so I wanted to kind of avoid the idea that spacecraft are just big airplanes that fly through a night sky.
Ron Cobb was of immense value to us. A1 is a brilliant science fiction draftsman, and he has a mind that analyzes the situations that we used to throw at him. So the look of Alien is a combination of his very methodical science fiction mind, where he would create vehicles as they should be and as they would fly, and Giger's dark kind of symbiosis of the sexual and mechanical paintings. Those two things Ridley fused into one image, which was how we did Alien. I worked a lot with Les Dilly. Les was always an art director in charge of the construction and how things were made, and I was, because I went through set decorating, and basically I developed this usage of scrap. On Star Wars, we didn't have a very high budget and we couldn't afford to make all the sets, so I developed this idea of breaking down jet engines and scrap metal and things, and we developed the way how to make it look real, which is an art in itself.
So we visited a bomber graveyard of aircraft, and there's Canberra bombers and Spitfires and, you know, Wellington bombers and all falling apart. And we went out, Roger said, you know, if I buy 2 of those scrap metal, we sell off the titanium because that's too expensive. We can dismantle, it'll take me a month to dismantle this. And we'll put them in organized pieces on shelves, and we can go in and we can make sculptural corridors. Then when that's right, then you can give me an okay on, let's say I do 6 feet, and you can come and have a look and say, yeah, I like that 6 feet. Because then once you've got that, then it can be repetition down that length of corridor. And we just worked on it that way. And it looked like it flew.
People would come on the set and just walk around and be amazed. They thought they were in a ship that was working. And I think that's the big contribution to the world of science fiction that really we made together as a team.
344 takes 7, A and B.
Where Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto were working, they were sort of like the rude mechanicals down in the basement, you know, arguing about their union rights and things like that. And it was Ridley's idea, actually, was that we built a long corridor, but to make it look longer, we put a mirror in at the far end, so slightly angled, so it looked like the corridor down, and then it went off like that. And it worked, trick, good trick.
I was staring at the landing leg and H, because we used the same landscape then. Later, I said, I want to build a landing leg to show the scale of the Nostromo. So we built this 58-foot landing leg foot, which still didn't look big enough. And so I thought, make up 3 tiny spacesuits, and this will look twice as big. And so they did, and we put one of the cameraman's kids in one suit, and Jake and Luke went into the other suits, and because it was high, I literally shackled them on. So they were on, so they couldn't move. And if you overcrank, when they get off and walk, of course, they become adults.
Suddenly the spaceship leg was like doubled in scale, so it made it absolutely massive. There were the inevitable tensions between 20th Century Fox and Ridley and everything like that, because Ridley was pushing the envelope. I mean, designing sets that had kind of, one hadn't seen sets like that sort of at that time since Kubrick and 2001. I mean, absolutely incredible. A tribute to the Shepherd Plaster Department, because all those Giger sculptures kind of and sets brought to life were absolutely amazing.
Gradually, down the line, I realized it made a lot of sense to have Giger design everything that was to do with the alien. That includes the landscape and the spacecraft, and then everything that was earthly, then it would be Michael Seymour and his team, right? And so that made a lot of sense, you know, 2 separate brains working on 2 different worlds.
I did some drawings, so Ridley Scott liked to have the exterior landscape, the space jockey, the exilo, exterior, interior, all the alien surroundings. And I was very happy to do that because I was not so limited. They had not money to do it like I designed it. You know, the whole thing looks a little bit like Art Nouveau. It was not organic enough, organic-like. It looked like handmade from artists. The eggs have been very good. They look real organic. Yeah, the eggs and the area where the eggs have been. And also the walls, they have been very good because this was planned to go in the X-silo. There was a round, like a throw, and that was very nice. I thought bones, yeah, they are dried and old, but they brought this fresh from the slaughterhouse, and there was a smell horrible because the inside of the bones that was just fresh, and we had a big box full of bones, and there was such a smell that we even myself, I wouldn't see that. I said, please go away with this. I only used dried bones, old, together with plasticine to do it. The scale was not wrong. It was too big. We couldn't find tubes and things of this size. So that didn't work very well. So Ridley always used smoke, everything, dark and smoke, and that makes the thing much better than it is. I want to have a landscape who is very much organic-like, and I would like to have old motors from motorcycle or things like that, big things to make a wonderful landscape, but there was no time and no money for this. A real mixed up, a real biomechanical landscape, that would be good.
Giger's sets were so erotic, and I mean, his big vaginas and penises, and I mean, it's like, you know, the whole thing is like you're going inside of some sort of womb or whatever. I mean, it's sort of visceral and all of those things, and I think all those elements came into it, and that's what makes it really work.
On the so-called space jockey, which Giger, by the way, designed that whole set, the alien, and he hand-brushed the alien, airbrushed it himself, and got on a scaffold and airbrushed the whole set so it would have that eerie texture. But the thing was this: they didn't want to give us, it was too expensive a set. They didn't want to give it to us. They said, well, look, you're only in here one time. It's different if you keep using this set. This is massively expensive. This whole big creature and this big back wall. They're saying, no, we can't give you this. It's absolutely too expensive. I think it was like $400,000 or $500,000. They said, this is not your main set. You're just going to have to walk by and see a skeletal imprint in the mud of this 15-foot creature. And then you'll walk into this strange-looking building. It doesn't have to have these immense walls. It'll be a bunker or something that's weirdly constructed at angles. And that's it. We can do that cheaper, and that's where we got to stop you. Some of these things, you're just going wild.
But the space jockey was one of those things I said, look, I can't cheat this, you know. It's got to be real. It's kind of the cockpit or the driving deck of whatever this craft was. And Giger had done this drawing, which I loved, and I said, this has got to be it.
But Ridley and I kept after him. He said, look, we need this because this is our Cecil B. DeMille shot. You got to have this so that when they see this, they know it's just not a little, like we were going to do a Roger Corman movie. You got to have the people walking in, not miniatures, camera pull back, and they're on this thing, and it's the most amazing set you've ever seen. Your jaw drops, and you know you're watching an A-level movie.
Really sort of was, loved having sets, so we would go on discussing ideas for sets and things, and so he would want something more, so I would get designed like storerooms and other pieces of action, and I kept building sets, and the guy from Fox, who was kind of very concerned about the fact we were running over schedule by like 4 weeks, was doing his best to stop that happening. So he would find out where I was building a set and have them pulled down, so we never got to shoot them. That happened on 2 or 3 occasions.
There's this set, which I think was an air shaft set or something, and there was this continual tussle with Ridley saying, I want that set, I want to shoot on that set. And Peter Beale would go around knowing exactly what Ridley was like. He'd discovered over the weeks of shooting, and he would actually do a sort of like a march around the studio and look in all the stages to make sure that all the sets that were being built, there was nothing that was being built without his approval. And I seem to remember it was this tussle of him saying, that is not going to be built, we're cancelling that set, and Ridley saying, no, build it.
I mean, it's one of those things, that we could have gone on and on and on. You know, we'd have built other things and bigger things and more spaceship and more hidden crannies. I mean, there's whole sequences which were cut out. There's a sequence where initially the alien creature gets Scarrett, the captain, and then he cocoons him and he's stuck to a wall in one of the storerooms, and he's become sort of food for the alien creature, and he's just glued to the wall. There's no way she can rescue him, so she burns him.
Walking on those sets, walking on those stages, and seeing the richness of design and texture, it began to get to you, literally physically. And then, of course, when we started to shoot and Ridley pumped the smoke in there, you were now in ghostly surroundings. What one realized is that we were doing, that Ridley was bringing this picture to the highest.
He was very strange looking, dressed all in black, you know, with this Swiss accent. And when we were looking at his work before we met him, we weren't really sure we wanted to meet him. You know? We were kind of disturbed about, is he really going to be here? You know.
I like if they are disturbed. Yes, that's good. I hate if they don't look at it, or if I have people they like my stuff, or others they hate it.
He's a wonderful artist. I think that was a great move having him design the whole film.
He was so strange. Most people kept him the creeps. They wanted his office way across the room than the other because he was like Dracula. He was Peter Lorre or something. He was always dressed in black. He had very soft voice, but there was always these horrible stories. We heard that he had the skeleton from his fiancée who had committed suicide, and people gave him the creeps. I got along with him great. Dan and I and Ridley got along superbly. Everyone else sort of thought he was so weird that they didn't work with him too much. And as a result, that was good. It was great for Dan and I because we got so much input, getting along with him so well. People would kind of shy away from him. They'd say he was obsessed in his work. He had bones and of all kinds all over the place.
The light hurts me. If you have too much sun, you like then to be in the shadow, and I like always to be in the shadow, in the dark.
I liked him a lot. He had a girlfriend called Mia, and they both dressed in black. He was very pale-skinned as well, and he was sort of spooky in a way, but I also kind of liked him, and there was a sweet side to him. He brought his mother over, you know, and his mother had hip replacements, and so he would take her out. I remember having dinner out one evening with him and his mother and Mia. And Giga was, I mean, we spent a lot of time together.
The eggs were designed and obviously made, and they would be the way up they were, with the aperture at the top, with a hydraulic opening, which would open looking very threatening, with Jimmy Shields' great sounds on it. It's still one of the great sounds that when it opens, and you hear that viscera, and the strength, you know it's strong. The detail that he looks at later would be shot at Bray when the film is finished. So we'd ship one of those eggs out to Bray, and to make it really strange, because if you watch carefully, the fluid on it is going upwards. So then you flip that over, and that always freaked them out when they saw that dripping upwards. And then inside it was semi-transparent, like a large piece of jelly. And all it was a fiberglass with mostly glass than fiber in it, so it's nearly transparent. And I needed it to move. When we were in Brisbane, we were in Bray, I kept looking, he's dead. So I have sticks in poking, it looked terrible. So we worked out a method of, as it was about to open, it kind of went like that, lit a little bit. And then I think he looks at it again. And inside are my hands with 2 rubber gloves on, washing up gloves. And all I'm doing is going like that. And so that was how that was done. And of course, after that, he comes in and looks into the aperture opens, he backs off. We say, don't go there. He goes there, looks in, and what he's staring at is what they call Nottingham lace, which is fundamentally cow's stomach. That lacy, fleshy stuff is we call tripe. And so I got buckets of this in white plastic buckets, and I'd have to put on a white coat and gloves and handling this stuff, and I just dressed it on it. And then I couldn't find a whiplash effect of anything that you made, like a hose that was delicate enough. So I'd seen this intestine, sheep's intestine, which is actually beautiful. It's gossamer, got little lines in it. Well, it was in fragments, because all you do is cover the bits and then say, it's not enough to have him look and it explodes. You need every moment of it, and slowed down. So we slowed it down because it was really fast. You turn an airline on, it just goes whash. It happens in less than a second. Whereas I think we stretched that to maybe 1.5 seconds, maybe. And then it hits him as he goes back. I've already got it attached to his face. So you need that bridge between him coming in to look, him looking in, what he sees. And this is like that. Explosion up into the camera, then cut where I've got this attached to his face as he falls backwards.
The face hugger, that was my first thing I did for Dan O'Banion when he sent me, I think, about $1,000 to do some paintings for Alien, and he gave me explanation and drawings, and he said that he's jumping on a big egg. This egg is about that, so, and I thought that must be quite a big monster, so I did an enormous face hugger, like a and he was jumping. I thought he could jump when his tail is curved like a spring devil or whatever, the Jack in the Box. Later on, he said I should do it smaller. So I think something with human hands is always scary, very scary. So I had the long fingers. What is the most important part on the face hugger, and then it's a part, there's a little sexual, like, yeah, and the tube for that this beast has to put in the mouth, and then late I had these hands in front, and then Dan O'Banion draw them sideways. That was better.
I thought, you can't beat this. The real thing's always better. So then I had orders coming from a very good fishmongers in Shepperton Village who had oysters, clams, and other parts of fish, a little bit of sturgeon, a little bit of caviar. I got them to make a cup with a container in rubber, which is the face hugger with the tail, the stinger, the like manta ray tail, and the hands. That was all articulated. Inside it, this was just a receptacle, and I just put in, with a pair of tweezers, put in 4 oysters, 1, 2, 3, 4, and put in a large kidney, and put in a so-and-so, and away you go. You can't do better than that. So you then poke at it with his instrument, and the legs move, and it gives you a shot.
The chest burst, that was a very, very heavy scene. I think the strongest thing in the whole film. The idea came from a painting from Bacon, Francis Bacon. Ridley Scott told me that this painting from 46, it's just a crucifixion, and one of the member has just teeth and red flesh, and he liked to have the chest burster like that, and I did some design. They look like chicken, something like chicken without feather, but I was not happy with. And then build up the thing, and it looked like a small dinosaur, and that was awful as I cut the legs, and so finally we only had the head and the tail, and that was enough.
What I liked about the film is that it was a very logical film in many ways with a thriller format, and I thought that was an excellent blend. But it's perfectly reasonable. It seemed to me that something should that some organism should incubate within the warmth of another being, you know, in that way.
I feel the strongest thing is always if it happened in your body or in someone's body. That's enormous. A worm in some, yeah, a worm in a living body. Oh. Yeah, that's just under the skin, and you see how it moves. Ooh, wow, wow. Yeah, I hate worms and snakes and things like that. It's awful. Ooh.
Well, people always ask me if we knew what was happening. Well, of course, we'd read a script. We knew that this little beast was going to come out.
We all knew what was in the script, which was the chest burster, and then the line that John had, "Oh my God," and it was this long word.
Sigourney and I actually had a scene after where we had to have seen the little thing. So they took us down to the puppet shop because we said, we don't even know what it looks like. I mean, if we're supposed to be relating to this thing, we need to know what it looks like. So they took us down to the puppet shop to show us. And, of course, they were so cute. I mean, here's this, like, you know, sort of penis thing with these teeth. And here's this, the guy goes, oh, and it's fabulous. Watch this. It breathes. See how it breathes? And then its teeth will go in and out. He starts describing this whole thing. Of course, it wasn't totally finished, but he was, like, so excited. Oh, okay, thanks.
The atmosphere on the set had a certain frisson, you know, in the morning, because everybody knew that this was filmically a sort of major scene. I don't think anybody had any idea that it would become a kind of film classic. It was much publicized, the fact that the cast didn't know what was going to happen. Well, of course, they knew what was going to happen. They knew that that the alien was going to arrive that way. What they didn't know is that it was going to be capped with little explosives, and that when it actually burst through, there'd be quite a shattering explosion, and that they'd all get splattered with blood and stuff.
I was watching him go about all this, so I was watching the effects, how they were going to set it up, so I perhaps may have been the only one that was aware of how this was going to be done.
This was going to create such a mess. It was going to be a one-take operation anyway. So the table was the round kitchen table upon which John would fall, and they'd turn him over, stretch him out, and hold him down, and then he could start. Somewhere in there would be a airline on his chest, which would let off a blast of air in pink, which will go ch like that, and they all go, Jesus, leap back, and that gives them a cut. After that, clear the set. Then we go in, and we basically screw down a artificial chest onto the table, which has its T-shirt pulled, you know, tightly on it. Then you got to razor blade this gently, because when that thing hits, you want it to burst it, because you're going to have a one shot, and in there's going to be bloodlines on high pressure pumps. They're going to blow blood everywhere.
I think our call was probably like 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. 3 hours, 4 hours goes by. So Harry's in the aisles. He's playing music. I think we even went to lunch, and we came back, and we're still sitting up there.
I remember Veronica had no idea and wanted to be kept in the dark.
By this point, we were wondering, what the hell is going on? So by the time they take us down to the set, the entire thing is shrouded in plastic. They have huge big buckets of offal sitting around. The place smells of formaldehyde like you wouldn't believe it.
I think Nicky ought to sent one of the guys down to, Ridley being keen on reality, to the local abattoir, where they got some kind of offal and a lot of blood and nasty bits and pieces.
We went and got all sorts of horrible things and buried it inside the chest. The special effects guys had arranged a ramp for it to break out.
When we came down to the set, there was going to be a rehearsal, which I think is great, and everyone was in black raincoats, and Ron Shusett and Dan O'Bannon, the original writers of the Chestburster idea, were over in the corner kind of going, you know, like kids before Christmas.
I saw their faces when they brought them in. What they saw was John Hurt spread out on this table with all of these hoses. Everybody is covered up in suits. The actors walk in and they see that waiting for them. And I saw them, their faces all sort of dropped. They all sort of went like this, and their eyes got big and roamed around all over this stuff.
He says, all right, well, the thing comes through the chest and stuff like that. So we'll just start this scene. And then the special effects guy says to me, oh, you'll get a little blood on you. I said, well, okay, you know. And so we all start. John's acting, you know. So everybody starts to lean in. And all of a sudden, Ridley shouts, cut! Because they realized that it wasn't going to break through this sort of starting scene that had been built.
We had problems with actually getting the device through the T-shirt, and the T-shirt had been sort of hit with a bit of acid and stuff to make it weaker, and then very carefully cut with blades and things. And so when that thing pushes up in the beginning and doesn't come through the thing, that was actually a mistake. But it looked so good with the blood sort of surging through the T-shirt.
So off we go again. So we're all leaning forward, we're all looking. And all of a sudden this thing, I mean, that was the first take. It was everybody's reaction. When that thing burst out of there, and they shot me with an entire blood pellet. It was like a jet of blood that hit I was so taken aback. My knees hit the back of the banquette, and I flipped upside down, and I had 2 cowboy boots sticking up. I turn over, I realize they're still shooting. I have to get up, and I continue acting.
I was looking across the chest on a longer lens towards Veronica Cartwright and Ian Holm. Blood sprayed everywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, God, what a fantastic actress, right? God, Ian's reacting well. God, that's great. I realized that Veronica was in shock.
She was so hysterical. She cried so much. I think it was real.
What you saw on camera was the real response. She had no idea what the hell happened. All of a sudden, this thing just came up.
Slow, Roger, and blood push out.
We didn't know what it was going to look like. And, you know, I remember blood. I looked over, and Veronica had blood all over her face. It was shocking. It was, all at once, it was like for real.
There's this great master where all of us are like watching it run off, because I think we were totally taken aback by how skillful it would be. You know, the little thing did its little, and gosh, it looked alive, and then we were all in shock. How'd they do that, you know, as actors and as characters?
The whole thing was really a trick in the cut. I mean, as I went onto the table and was in pain and so on, you might say in the pangs of birth, there was a cut to the other side of the table by which time I had been replaced by a replica body, and that I was bent double under a hole in the table. So that happened in the cut from this side to that side. And then there was quite a long time as one prop man underneath the table kept pushing this alien on a stick, saying, "Is it coming through yet, Eric? Can you see it? Is it coming through?" He says, "No, not yet, Alf." You know, a lot of that was going on.
Under the table is Roger Deakins, who had actually finally got to do the chest burst. That wasn't Giga, it was Roger Deakins. And he let it fly, and it was very simply just underneath, next to John, shove it hard through up here, hits the thing and bursts out. And then he has somebody on wires who's got to make it go, you know, the snarl, and then reaction of the actors. Then I can go to the next setup. And meanwhile, there'll be blood everywhere.
Turning, and ready, Rog. And action.
Blood.
Blood.
Enough.
Push it out. Pump it. snarl, snarl. Okay, and the head back. Snarl, go! Shit, great. Cut it.
Cut it. Save the blood.
The table was split, actually. There was about a 6-inch, maybe 8-inch gap. They had a man on a dolly, sort of skateboard thing underneath, and he had the puppet up like this. And then there was a guy with a rope, tow rope on the other side, and he would do his thing, and then they would just whip him out, and off he'd go.
They wanted the tail to move on it, and I hit upon the idea of just putting a little tiny thin plastic tube down the end of the tail and just valving about 100 pounds to square it through the tail, and it made the tail do that as it went whistling off across the floor. And it was something that took us 5 minutes to do, and we thought that was going to be one of those things that was going to take us for ages to do.
Things could be done in post today. We'll digitally do the little baby alien and stick him on later, etc. But we had to do it kind of then. So it's the same old kind of elastic band and chewing gum making movie type mentality that I think we were forced to use, but very, very effective when it's cut well and shot well. It works incredibly effectively.
To me, when I look back, it's John's performance that's heartbreaking, heartbreaking. He's our hero. And that this could happen to him is still, spine-tingling.
We started off with the idea that the monster, there'd be no scales, no fangs, no claws. It's going to be something completely different. Once we'd seen the head, the Giger head that became the alien, we were in great shape on that. And Rambaldi actually built a separate head with 900 moving parts.
There are also tubes from an old Rolls Royce, there are from vertebrae, from snakes, and it was a mixture from everything together, was built up together with plasticine that doesn't shrink much, and so it holds. You can put things together normally, it's not possible.
The creature design was one of those things that just kept on looming. In the end, that became, I think, one of my sort of major tasks was to find people or to help find people. And I found Roger Dickin, who designed the face hugger, chest burster, and all that, the smaller things. He wanted very much to design the creature, but and there were several sort of attempts at that, but until Gordon Carroll, one of the three producers, but the main producer on the movie, brought in Carlo Rambaldi, done Close Encounters. They brought him in to actually put Giger's designs into practice. And I think we had one or two attempts at tails and heads from various people at Shepperton. We had this elaborate mechanical tail that never ever really quite worked. So there were several attempts before Rambaldi was brought on at quite a lot of, over the budget, unfortunately, to do it. But my God, it did work from then on.
Because the Giger is the author, number one, of the creation of Alien, I don't suggest anything about modify something, the detail of the vein, of the muscle, of the face. No. In this case, the creator is Giger.
When the alien, the actual alien creature, which had been designed by Giger and manufactured by Carlo Rambaldi and his team, arrived, Ridley had a few problems with it. The mechanism, the jaw mechanism, actually had visible springs and things which were sticking out, and the head was wider than Ridley wanted it.
His paint, I think, was too long, the face. Must reduce, and too many detail. We conserve a lot of detail, but I think 20% of detail the movement no need. You modify little. The mechanism of the mouth no was very complicated. It's 3 movements. One cable for open the mouth, second cable the tongue coming out from the mouth, and another cable for open the small mouth of the tongue. This is a general mechanical system for the tongue, this drawing. And the tongue, when open the mouth, the tongue slide. Because it's impossible to clear the actor, we use this mechanical system just for control this movement. But after this mechanism was reduced very, when the actor is inside, because this is exactly the position of the head of the actor.
Well, it's going to be a guy in a suit, you know, and don't forget technology today, it'd be easy.
First we tried to invent something, so Ridley asked for some people from a circus, and they try to walk in a specific way, or he wants to put 2 or 3 people together, bend them together and to put something over, and it was always a little ridiculous, the whole thing, and it wasn't scary. And so we decided, I think it's the scariest thing is to be very close to a human being.
In those days, I couldn't even get latex thin enough that wouldn't break, you know, quickly. And it would also take sculptural elements of sinew, and because you've got to lay the sinews into the rubber suit. So suddenly the rubber suit isn't like, it should have been as thin as a contraceptive and as strong as nylon, right? Because then I can crush this person into the suit and have all kinds of things built and stitched into it. I need someone extraordinarily thin, because whatever you did, there was a stuntman who was pretty thin, we put him in, he didn't look right. Funnily enough, that week, one of the casting directors had been standing in a pub and had stared at this guy who looked like probably close to 7 feet, right? And very slender, very thin, kind of elegant. And his name was Bolaji. So the guy had gone over to him in the pub and said, you know, they all lined, how do you like to be in movies? And the guy had a kind of North London accent. And he was a graphic designer. So he turned up with very bemused and curious, and he was then attached to the film for the next 10 months. And so he did all the stuff where he had to, like coming out the wall in the shuttle at the end, in the corridor coming around the corner when Sigourney's trying to get out with the cat, when he approaches Veronica Cartwright with his tail, and we get this sense of something really hideous because you hear her off camera.
They built the suit to him, which was just unbelievable. I mean, his hands were below his kneecaps when he would just stand normally. So they just literally put gloves on him with elongated hands, and they put that head on him, and they sent him to Tai Chi and to mime classes so that he could learn to slow down and manipulate, and roll up. And when he first gets me, he's in a down position and he comes up and rolls out, and it was just so creepy.
I always felt keep it really tight and only see the bits you want to see, because this is always stronger than anything else. So if you think you've seen something, it's always going to be probably more horrific and horrifying.
I asked to Ridley, why are you shooting very little of Alien? And Ridley said, Carlo, the audience have terror when they don't see nothing. When see the dark area, because expecting the monster possible here, it is maximum the level of the suspense. Say, no, it's good. I shoot this little, Carlo, be quiet. Your movie, your monster, people saw, but very little.
Well, actually, we see quite a lot of the beast. You certainly get a good old look at chestburster. You get a terrific look at the egg. You get a great look at the other elements and the evolutions, and I think you get plenty. You get a great look at the head, which is beautiful. Harry Dean Stanton, the thing's hanging there.
Now, that was a gymnast that they got him put in that suit, and he was curled up in the change. The amazing thing was, when they shot up, you couldn't even tell that he was up there. The way he uncoiled and came down and then put his arms out, and I mean, it looked like, that crucifix. Christ is ascending. I'm going to take your life now. I mean, it was like very bizarre and very sort of gothic, which goes a lot with what the whole Giger gothic thing is. Poor guy couldn't sit down, so they made a special swing for him. Tom Skerritt said, I mean, this guy can't walk around like this. This is ridiculous. Do something for this poor person. They hadn't even thought of how he was going to sit down because you have that tail and that rubber suit. I mean, that poor thing was in that suit all day long.
I came to work one day right at the lunch break, so the big doors were open, and out of the sound stage came the crew and the alien monster still in his suit, but with the head off, thin as a nail. And he's walking with the wardrobe lady, who's 5 feet. And they're talking politics or whatever, very intense conversation as they're walking off to lunch. And he's got these tennis shoes on that are bright blue, Adidas. And the tail is being carried by another wardrobe guy who was a rather flamboyant guy who had this white ascot blowing in the wind. It was one of those, I wish I could have photographed that one.
We used to have a dresser. His name was Mother. We called her Mother. And he was in charge of doing the alien. Of course, there was always supposed to be a lot of slime and stuff on him.
KY jelly was very much in fashion at the time, and I think that was put on everything that moved in front of the camera, on the alien, it was dripping from everywhere.
I have never seen bigger tubes of KY jelly. They were like gigantic sizes. And then you'd have Mother going, I'll do it. And then he would come running out with his huge big tubes of KY and start caressing this poor alien's ass, rubbing it and making it glisten. And oh God, it was hysterical. We did have some good times.